The ministry always smelled faintly of dust and polish, as though it had been cleaned too often but never well enough. I moved through its corridors with practiced irritation, robes against stone, boots striking a cadence I did not bother to soften. This was not my environment. The ministry thrived on excess motion and minimal consequence. Committees, subcommittees, panels convened to decide matters that should never have required more than a spine and a signature. Today's inconvenience fell squarely into the latter category. Underage magic. Controlled. Minor. A student with more nerve than discretion, caught casting outside approved parameters and reported by a neighbor who had clearly been waiting for an excuse to feel important. I had read the report once, sighed, and filed it under predictable. It was a Tuesday problem. I took my seat, hands folding neatly atop the folder in front of me. The chamber was small, wood-paneled, acoustically unforgiving. A raised desk held 3 ministry officials who were already shuffling parchment as though movement itself lent legitimacy to their roles. The student sat to my left, pale, alert, doing a poor job of pretending not to panic. I was aware of the gallery behind me only in the abstract. Observers came and went. Oversight committees sent representatives to remind Hogwarts that it was, in theory, accountable to someone. I rarely bothered to note them. Thankfully, the proceedings began precisely on time. The charge was read, the facts presented. A wand traced the residue of magic already catalogued and stamped into oblivion by bureaucracy. I listened with half an ear, already constructing the response I had given a dozen times before in different configurations. When it was my turn, I stood. My voice was level, unemotional, exact. I spoke of intent rather than outcome, of capability rather than recklessness, of a student who had misjudged visibility, not power. I did not excuse the action. I contextualized it. This, of course, was by the book, more muscle memory than anything else. But as I spoke, I felt it. Eyes watching me. From the gallery. Not scrutiny. I'm accustomed to that. Attention. Measured. Unhurried. I did not turn. I did not break cadence. But some part of me, the part honed by years of surviving classrooms and corridors and darker rooms still, registered the difference immediately. Someone in the chamber was not listening for outcome. They were listening for method. When I finished, there was a brief silence. The kind that suggested the panel had not expected efficiency and needed a moment to catch up. A verdict followed. A warning. A formal notation. No suspension. No further action. Exactly as it should have been. I inclined my head once and resumed my seat. The student exhaled, barely perceptible. I did not acknowledge it. Relief was a private matter. As the chamber began to empty, I gathered my papers with precise economy. It was only then, as I rose and turned, that I saw her clearly. She stood near the back of the room, not speaking to anyone, not preparing to leave. A slim folio rested against her arm. Her posture was relaxed but intentional, as though she occupied space by choice rather than obligation. She had not written anything during the hearing, I was certain of it. Her gaze met mine without hesitation. Not challenging, not warm. She did not smile. I looked away first, irritation flickering beneath my composure. Oversight functionaries were all the same. They watched, they tallied, they mistook observation for authority. And yet, as I exited the chamber, the echo of her attention followed me down the corridor. It was, I told myself firmly, just another Tuesday. The corridor outside the hearing chamber funneled people away from consequence and toward their next inconvenience. Clerks passed in clusters. A junior official hurried by with a stack of files held too tightly. Somewhere deeper in the building, a clock chimed the half hour with all the enthusiasm of a reprimand. I had nearly reached the corner when...
Professor Snape.
I turned, fixed my expression to polite disinterest, and found her a measured distance away. Close enough to be intentional, far enough to suggest restraint. Up close, the impression sharpened. She dressed conservatively, but not modestly. Every line was deliberate. Nothing ornamental, nothing wasted. She looked like someone who understood institutions because she had survived them. Yes? She offered a professional handshake.
Senior Analyst, Educational Oversight Subcommittee.
She was a recent transplant, not a product of Hogwarts. That alone made her unfamiliar in a way I did not appreciate. Ministry officials were tedious, but they were predictable. Former students carried history whether they meant to or not. Even adversaries were easier to anticipate when I knew where they had been shaped. She had been shaped elsewhere, and she had come to me already polished. I felt she was observing me, cataloguing reaction rather than seeking it. I inclined my head a fraction. I assume this is where you inform me that my testimony will be reviewed, summarized, and stripped of all context.
No, that's already been done. I'm not here about today's hearing.
Then you've wasted both our time.
On the contrary, today was enlightening.
I don't involve myself in ministry theatrics, nor do I alter my conduct to suit committees.
I wouldn't expect you to. That would defeat the point. I'm reviewing patterns, Professor, not cases.
Patterns meant foresight. Patterns meant prevention. Patterns meant someone who preferred to act before damage occurred. If you have concerns, submit them through the appropriate channels. She nodded once, as though I had confirmed something she already suspected.
This is the appropriate channel.
There was no apology in her posture, no deference in her tone, and most telling of all, there was no trace of awe. She spoke to me the way one spoke to a colleague whose competence was assumed, not celebrated. Dangerous, that. On what grounds do you consider my conduct noteworthy? She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she stepped aside as a group of ministry officials passed between us. When the corridor cleared, she spoke again.
You distinguish ambition from misconduct. Most people don't bother.
That is hardly exceptional.
It is increasingly rare.
I have no interest in being evaluated.
Then it's fortunate I'm not evaluating you. I'm determining who understands what comes next.
With that, she inclined her head in a gesture that was neither farewell nor dismissal. I remained where I stood, an unsettling awareness that I had just been identified as a potential variable in someone else's long game. She had disappeared around the corner, so I resumed walking. And though I did not look back, the sense of being marked followed me. The Ministry Cafe was an exercise in sanctioned chaos, voices layered over one another without resolution. Cutlery struck porcelain with too much enthusiasm. Somewhere behind the counter, a charm malfunctioned and produced steam in erratic, irritated bursts. The air smelled of overbrewed tea and something fried long past its prime. I entered, already regretting it. I had no particular hunger. Habit, more than appetite, guided me. Eat when the opportunity presents itself. Avoid lingering. Leave before someone mistakes proximity for invitation. I collected a tray with mechanical efficiency. Soup, bread, tea dark enough to be serviceable. That was when I saw her. She sat near the center of the room, where the noise converged but never quite touched her. Her posture was unchanged from the corridor earlier, composed, self-contained. A single folio rested beside her plate, untouched. There was one empty chair at her table. I scanned the room. Every other surface was occupied. Bodies pressed into corners, colleagues leaning too close, conversations spilling where they did not belong. I looked back at her. She met my gaze without surprise. The pause stretched exactly long enough to become noticeable. She gave the subtlest nod of invitation. I stepped forward. I set my tray down across from her with deliberate finality and took the chair as though it had been reserved by right rather than circumstance.
Do you choose to sit out of convenience or curiosity?
I chose efficiency. This was the only seat not attached to a conversation I'd rather not overhear. For a time, we ate in silence. Not the awkward sort, the deliberate kind. I took a few spoonfuls of soup out of obligation rather than interest. She broke her bread without urgency, as though time were not something she felt compelled to fill. It was she who spoke first.
You didn't soften your assessment in there.
There was no reason to.
Most confuse leniency with wisdom.
Leniency produces complacency. Fear produces resentment. Neither produces competence.
So, you favor discipline.
I favor results.
You make a distinction most institutions avoid.
Institutions avoid effort. Containment is cheaper than correction.
What about redirection?
Redirection implies willingness.
On whose part?
On the student.
And if the student is willing, but the system isn't?
Then the system fails, predictably. What struck me unexpectedly was not the content of her questions, but their construction. She wasn't probing for agreement. She wasn't leading me toward a conclusion. She was mapping the boundaries of my thinking, testing load-bearing walls.
Do you believe in correcting behavior before it becomes disruptive?
Preemptively.
If necessary.
That depends on whether the behavior is exploratory or strategic.
Most people don't know the difference.
Most people shouldn't be responsible for children.
You don't ask whether it's fair.
Fairness is irrelevant. Effectiveness is not. She tapped one finger lightly against the table.
And if a child learns the rules too well? If they begin to anticipate consequences, weigh them rather than fear them.
Then you teach them restraint and timing. She listened the way engineers listened, for structure, for stress points, for where something might break if pushed too hard. I realized with a faint irritation that she was not interested in my opinions. She was interested in the framework.
I have a child at Hogwarts.
The words were offered plainly, without preface or emphasis, as though she were stating a credential rather than a vulnerability. My attention sharpened at once, though my expression did not change.
Recent transfer. Slytherin. You know him.
I do.
He's observant. Quick to learn systems. Less interested in rules than in how closely they're enforced.
She did not smile. She did not apologize for him. She did not soften the edges. I was familiar with her son, a student who listened for advantage rather than instruction. You're concerned.
I'm attentive. Concern implies ignorance.
I inclined my head slightly.
He tests boundaries, not for attention, for information.
That is not a flaw.
No, but it is frowned upon.
There it was. Not fear, not panic, preemption.
I don't want him corrected only after he's already decided the system is adversarial.
I felt her words settle somewhere uncomfortably familiar.
He's suffered enough adversaries already. America, before the divorce. His father valued order, simpler hierarchies, harsher techniques for correction. That is not a pattern I want him to anticipate here.
There was no need to ask further questions. The cadence was too precise, the omissions too deliberate. I recognized the shape of the story even without its details, a man who mistook volume for authority, a household where fear passed for discipline. She watched me notice.
I left. I won't apologize for that. I refused to raise him in fear. And I refused to teach him that shrinking was a survival strategy.
That sentence resonated in an unexpected way. My mother had endured. This woman had acted. I felt the contrast keenly. Endurance had been framed as virtue in my own childhood, silence as strength, remaining as loyalty. I believed early that escape was not an option, only adaptation. The woman before me had chosen otherwise. I forgot the cafe entirely. The noise dulled to a distant hum. The table between us felt suddenly too small for the weight of what had just been placed upon it.
You understand?
I did. There was no need for further elaboration. I could tell she understood in that moment. I saw myself reflected in her son and saw in her the shape of a future that had never been available to my own mother. I shifted slightly, reclaiming posture, discipline, distance. Hogwarts is not gentle with boys like that.
I know. That's why I'm paying attention to the people who aren't gentle or careless.
Something fundamental had shifted. This was no longer an abstract discussion of policy or pedagogy. This was lineage, trajectory, intervention. I realized with a faint, unwelcome clarity that I had already begun to see the boy not as a hypothetical, and that was dangerous. Silence followed, but it was not uncomfortable. It was evaluative.
I want to be clear about something, Professor. I'm not asking for favoritism.
Good, that is not something I indulge.
Nor am I asking for protection.
Protection implied weakness, implied fear. Neither suited her. What then?
I'm interested in understanding the man responsible for shaping boys like my son.
The phrasing was precise, not influencing, not managing. Institutions are blunt instruments, people are not. I've learned the difference the hard way.
You recognize potential before it becomes inconvenient. If my son tests boundaries, and he will, I want to know whether the person responding sees a problem to be punished or a trajectory to be corrected. I don't need you to be kind to him. I need you to be accurate.
You assume that I would involve myself at all.
I assume you already have.
The statement was quiet. You are attempting to secure an ally in advance of conflict.
I prefer alignment to damage control.
This was not the crude transactional overture usually offered by parents. Slytherins had a habit of reaching for coin purses first, but now I understood. This conversation was not about terms, it was reconnaissance. You understand that I will not intervene unless intervention is warranted.
I wouldn't want you to. Unwarranted intervention teaches the wrong lesson.
She studied me for a moment longer than courtesy required, not searching for reassurance or concession, but committing something to memory. Then she nodded.
Good.
The word carried finality. She reached for her folio at last, sliding it beneath her arm as she rose. The movement was unhurried, deliberate, a woman accustomed to leaving rooms on her own terms.
Then I have what I need.
You seem confident.
I am. You've already answered every question I intended to ask. You won't soften him to make him palatable, and you won't break him to make him obedient. That's rarer than you think.
I did not respond. There was no need. The negotiation was concluded, the contract signed in the subtext of our silence. She turned and moved through the crowded cafe. She did not weave or apologize. The crowd simply seemed to part for her, as though something in them recognized resolve and made room for it. I remained in my seat, my hand still resting near the place where she had tapped the table. The tea had grown cold. For several seconds I watched the doorway she had vanished through, as if it might return her by mistake. It did not. In the harsh, unforgiving light of the ministry, I felt something unpleasant stir in my chest. Not longing, not sentiment, recognition. I saw the ghost of my mother's eyes in the space she had occupied, but where Eileen Prince would have looked at the floor or the wall or the bruise she pretended no one noticed. This woman had looked directly into the sun and refused to blink. Leaving was not a betrayal to her, it was strategy. War waged quietly on behalf of her child. She had not stayed to become a martyr. She had left to become a fortress. I should have despised the comparison it forced upon me. Instead, I found myself measuring the distance between that strength and my own habits of endurance. A laugh burst too loudly from a nearby table, jolting the cafe back into focus. Cutlery clattered. A chair scraped. The ministry resumed its shallow, frantic breathing. I rose, smoothing my robes into place with familiar precision. I would see her son in the dungeons. I would hold him to a standard that would make him formidable. I would be accurate, as she requested. As I turned toward the exit, I caught myself searching the room one final time as if she might still be there, watching, assessing, deciding. She was not. Good, I told myself. Only then did it occur to me that I had never committed her name to memory, not because she had withheld it, because I had not asked. I stepped into the corridor, my expression once more a mask of practiced indifference, and resumed my day as though nothing of consequence had occurred. It was, after all, just a Tuesday.